on the meeting. So our speaker tonight is Nathan Lou. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Owner-operator of Lou Family Farm and Nursery in San Diego, 1-acre regenerative agricultural research site. Also, he's the executive director and co-founder of Mongol Tribe Inc. It's a nonprofit organization supporting community development and capacity building by bridging health and wellness with civic ecology. So thank you so much, Nathan. It's all you, mate.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Yeah, it's great to be here, everyone. Yeah, I love the Rare Fruit Growers Group.
Oops. Sorry, Nathan. Yep.
That's okay. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah, it's definitely one of the it's definitely one of the greatest community groups I've been in. I really enjoy just the cooperative elements of it, and you know, if you're looking for you know, plants information around trees and cuttings and scions and grafting and all that stuff, this is definitely the group to be a part of. So, and you know, I'm sure a lot of the other members are probably been around many years here and can reflect upon the value and equity that the group brings to the community. So yeah, thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak. Let me get my little screen share here and pop up my presentation. All right, everybody able to see that okay? Good, okay. Let's see, make sure I can see my chat. There's my chat, good confirmations. Okay, great. Okay. So I gave this presentation a few months ago to the Rare Fruit Growers Group that I'm a part of, is with the San Diego chapter. And this is a fun reflection upon how to support our soil health and well-being, which is a key part of growing plants, right? The plants grow themselves. You know, if you have healthy soil, the plants will thrive. So, you know, just really a key piece of the success in cultivation. So this is a picture of, in my orchard, watermelon, the Stars and Moon watermelon. And this did amazing. I got my largest one out of there was almost 40 pounds. Very productive, just a nice use of the spaces in between all the orchard area. So definitely a fun crop to have amongst the orchard. Let's see. So I am a San Diego native. I'm born and raised here in San Diego, and I studied agriculture at Yuba College, which is in Marysville, near UC Davis area. And then I transferred to Oregon State, where I studied natural resources with an emphasis on fish and wildlife conservation. There, it was a digital online program. So a lot of my studies and work was focused in San Diego and in this, you know, this region of the coast, which was really awesome for me to be able to look at my home community and resources and kind of reflect upon what the challenges are and where the opportunities are for plugging into the community. And so I've been growing plants for over 15 years. You know, I'm a millennial, so it's been almost half my life. My grandparents got me into growing plants. They're Chinese background, and they had all these amazing fruit trees. Chinese grapefruit was one of my favorite ones that I could remember. And then that, of course, got me into loquats and all these other kind of specialty fruits. And goji berries is another unique one that I grow in the orchard. So yeah, pretty much any type of cultivation I've tried and kind of reflected upon. And I now moved into more orchard practice and care as I'm pursuing my arboriculture certifications. So a couple years back, oh, the picture, these are loquats. These are Big Jim loquats. One of our founding members in San Diego, yeah, Jim Neitzel. This was one of his selections. Yeah, huge fruits. They are a little bit bigger than apricots. This was last year, and Yeah, delicious. Almost like a little citrus flavor to them, but highly recommended. You can graft these. You can start them from seed and then graft your selected cultivars onto them. But yeah, I highly recommend the big gems. Yeah, and then so a couple of years back, I just turned the corner on my third year in February of Mongol Tribe, which is like Kirk said, is a community development and capacity building organization. My focus has been on bridging health and wellness and civic ecology, as I can grow a lot of food, and I grow a lot of different herbs and specialty medicines, a lot of different Chinese herbs and things. And I have a lot of friends in the acupuncture community and the wellness community. So I'm working on kind of bringing those groups together. And I have a couple projects going on with the nonprofit. One of them is seed libraries. So I started a seed library at one of our local libraries in Ocean Beach, and it's been really doing very well. And I think, let's see, we just turned the corner of a year in March. So they've got over 200 folks that have been in and out of that seed library. And I'm in the process of submitting for some grants through our community enhancement program in the county to be able to expand to more of our public libraries and incorporate some of these seed programs. Part of that is also included education and presentations around cultivation and soil health and seed starting and those kind of things. And another thing I'm working on with the organization is developing an apprenticeship program. We're working towards being able to help facilitate more regenerative agriculture, which gets me into my Lou Family Farm and Nursery, which is a project that basically started to be able to implement some of these regenerative agriculture practices on a site where I can show people and take people out to visit and kind of implement some of these alternative concepts, such as cover cropping, like we're going to be talking about tonight. So I'm turned the corner of 4 years. I've just started fourth year in December operating there. I have over 30 trees, a bunch of different types, 7 types of pomegranates, 3 different types of figs, a couple types of mulberries, various stone fruits, peaches, nectarines, plums, apricots, apples, growing a few different types of bananas. Lots of tree collards and chayotes do really well there. Especially things like lemongrass and sugar canes and stuff like that. So along with a handful of natives, of course. So that's been a really interesting process of kind of learning what it takes to develop an apprenticeship program, of being able to kind of implement some of these concepts and, have it be something that is seen as a value, because a lot of times regenerative agriculture can look kind of messy because there's so many different types of plants. At the farm in the 3 years that I've had it, I've produced over 50 different types of crops, thousands of pounds of food, and mainly just for my friends and family who help me out at the farm. And it's been a really amazing learning opportunity. And so it's currently a regenerative culture research site. And that's going to be one of my directions moving towards operations within the community, is kind of establishing of these kind of agroforestry, agroecology sites within the urban setting. And then my last hat that I wear currently is as the food justice co-chair for Slow Food, our urban San Diego chapter. Slow Food's an international organization focused on good, clean, fair food for all. And as the food justice co-chair, am helping to kind of bring a voice to the underprivileged, underserved communities. A big component that often is missed in the food system and in many industries is cultural competency. So we kind of address some of those aspects and try and make sure that the various voices of the different communities that exist within San Diego are represented. Particularly one that we've been focusing on is our Kumeyaay community. I'm directly involved with our local tribal community through some friendships and various partnerships. And so we've been doing our best to incorporate the tribal community in the various events that we're showcasing. And one of the highlights that I really have about working with this organization has been a year back, we had our kind of flagship event. It's an annual event, and we had a panel of Kumeyaay community come out and speak to us about some of their various land practices and food history and heritage. So it was really a lot of fun. So yeah, so I have a very diverse background, and yeah, it's really been a lot of fun kind of engaging with the San Diego community and the agriculture of these things. So what are cover crops? This is a question that a lot of folks aren't really able to answer. So hopefully by the end of the night, you guys will all be well versed in what cover crops are, and even more specifically about why you might choose one versus another. This is the start of my cover cropping career with a small little patch about 5 feet by 10 feet in my apartment. And this area, I grew a bunch of different things, carrots and kale and, collard greens, a bunch of different things out of here. But in order to prepare the soil, because this area had not really been cultivated outside of the little, I think it's a little like Mexican tarragon or something like that, little purple flowers there. And there's some goosefoot kind of scattered through there, a couple different natives, but overall it was just the soil was kind of mediocre. So I seeded white clover amongst this whole area just to kind of get it established. And I threw in a few bulbs. That's a little saffron flower, the purple there that you can see. So, those are kind of scattered throughout, but this really kind of got things going for me in my cover cropping practices. So, after this, I was able to start working in this cover crop into the soil and being able to add that as a mulch and kind of aeration, and then being able to then plant my seeds into it. So in order to answer the question, what are cover crops, right? Cover crops are plants grown to improve soil conditions by increasing aeration and water infiltration, reducing erosion, reducing soil compaction, providing essential nutrients, fixing nitrogen, increasing organic matter, preventing leaching loss, providing soil cover, suppressing weeds, attracting and increasing activity of beneficial micro and macroorganisms, generating income from grazing or haying, and increasing biomass. As you can see, they're very multifaceted. Some cover crops will do all of these. Some of them will do part of them. But basically, cover crops are consisting of legumes, grasses, and grains of various types, both annuals and perennials. And they're grown in summer, winter, or both. And the crops are typically mulched or tilled into the soil, which results in the release of nutrients during their decomposition process. So this is where, a lot of times folks are hearing the word cover crops, but actually picking what their function is and selecting amongst the types of cover crops available to serve that function can be tricky. So that's some of the aspects that I'm going to go over today. So that way, when you think about your areas where you might want to grow a particular cover crop, you can have a better idea of which one you might select. So why are they important? Basically, we've been researching cover crops for quite some time now. And the reason that soil scientists are so concerned about it is this estimated loss of topsoil. They're estimating that in the last 200 years, because of the various agriculture practices, we've lost 30% of our topsoil because of leaving the soil bare and fallow for a significant portion of the year. So cover crops are therefore an integral part of the recovery of our topsoil. And if we manage them appropriately, the cover crops have the potential to pay for themselves in a multitude of ways. So cover crops play an important role in improving productivity of subsequent row crops by improving the soil physical, chemical, and biological properties. This is an important part to reflect upon because, again, when we talk about soil health, we're really looking at these three aspects: physical, chemical, and biological properties, right? What is the physical texture like, right? What is the chemical composition within the soil? And then what are its life biological properties, right? Are there fungus and bacteria active in its presence, right? So that's one of the things we kind of reflect upon between our current modern agriculture practices versus our traditional agriculture practices like Korean natural farming, or as we more currently are working towards is regenerative agriculture, which all of these practices, we try to reduce and eliminate bare soil from our cultivation. So we can see that, within the, last couple hundred years, a lot of our monocropping and large-scale agriculture practices, especially moving towards mechanized practices in agriculture, are really the reason we've lost a lot of this topsoil. And topsoil is difficult to regain. It really takes a time, a physical breakdown, and so this is why we end up having to we see a lot of the chemical applications happening to kind of try and restore those components that are lost within the natural ecology by using these modern practices in agriculture. So again, like the things that I'm talking about are not really new concepts. They are they're really recovered concepts, and they're aspects of agriculture that we've used in our ancestry for many generations. We just kind of had lost sight a little bit of some of these traditions and how they actually work. So in the last few decades, we've been really proving the science, so to speak, and really coming to that understanding of why these concepts work and how to actually kind of restore our agriculture to the prowess that it once was. So the USDA NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, has identified 4 basic principles for maintaining and improving soil health. The first one is keep the soil covered as much as possible, which I mentioned in the last slide. So this part of it is where improving your biodiversity is a really amazing opportunity to do so. Wildflowers, right, are a good example of one way we can keep it covered. But really perennial agriculture and perennial permaculture, as a lot of the folks in the permaculture movement like to reflect upon, is keeping the soil covered as much as possible means planting more perennials, so that way you have things that take up space. And then number 2, disturbing the soil as little as possible. So this is when we think about traditional or modern agriculture, we're looking at the disking every season or every other season. That's eliminating a lot of our beneficial mycorrhizal fungal growth and the various biological activity that's occurring in our surface. The top 6 to 12 inches of the soil has a lot of life happening in it, and when we disturb the soil, we're exposing that life to oxygen, and a lot of it can tolerate some oxygen and some exposure, but not the amount that disking really provides to it. So this is another reason we hear about regenerative agriculture supporting no-till farming. And no-till farming is something that I apply at the farm that I have in, it's something that I use a broad fork. That's basically the most that I'm disturbing my soil is when I'm gonna prep an area for new planting is using a broad fork. But really just, keeping as much of that soil surface intact as possible. Even with the cover crops, after I grow the cover crops, I'm going to go through and I'm going to cut them so that way the roots still maintain their structure and hold the soil in place. So that's a really key piece of this principle. Number 3 is keeping plants growing throughout the year to feed the soil. So this is, again, perennial agriculture, right? Perennial permaculture. So this is where I like to reflect upon, all the different culinary herbs, various things that we could be growing, from rosemaries and lavenders and things like that, and oreganos and thymes. Those kind of things are really great. So let's see, Brittany. So in our home setting, should compost not be tilled in using a rototiller? Just turn in with pitchfork or something. So this kind of depends on your situation. With compost, if it's really rich and you're planting, like, let's say a raised bed, you can go ahead and mix it in the top 6 inches. But typically, and if it's not super hot, I just leave it as a mulch on the top. And then when you water, everything's going to break down and go into it. The big thing I think about as far as in San Diego is we have a lot of clay in our soil. I'm not sure if that's similar for where you guys are at. But with clay, that's a lot of times why folks are recommending using the tiller to kind of mix that surface layer in with the clay. I'm more of a proponent of using gypsum, powdered gypsum. It acts like a surfactant. So when you put it on the surface of your soil and then you add water to it, it'll bubble. And so those bubbles create pockets in your soil. And then if you have your compost or your mulch on top of that, as that pocket starts to open, the mulch layers start to permeate into the soil and hold that pocket space open. So this is it takes time. It takes a year before you really see the impact of it. But your second year, you're starting to see the permeation unfold. And so usually I applied every other year as needed, right? So if you apply it now, which is a good time because we're still getting a little bit of rain, apply it now, add your compost or mulch on top of it. You could even fertilize when you apply the gypsum at the same time, and then cover it with your compost. Then when your rains and your waters come, then it'll permeate and it'll start to break down and open up those pore spaces. And then next year, after you can see that the conditions change in your soil, then you can kind of address whether or not you should apply again in the second year. But typically I've noticed in most places that one application of gypsum goes a long way. And it's usually about 10 pounds for every 100 square feet. And you can get a 40-pound bag for somewhere from $8 to $10. So it's a really a great method for if you have slow compacted soil, slow draining soil. Now on our coastlines where we have DG, that is kind of, again, a different situation where you have a lot of drainage. And so, again, mixing in the surface is okay, but I mean, in just my experience, I haven't found the need to disturb it more than the first time. If I have never planted anything there and it's dead soil, basically, if it's nothing living there, I'm going to repair that soil, and in that process, then I'm open to using a tiller. But outside of that, then I haven't really found the need to go through that process. I'm more of a long-term planner in that way, where I would rather take the time and let the biological properties of gypsum kind of work its way into the soil. But just applying it at the right rates is really the most important thing. So, and then once you're planting stuff, and you plant these perennials and you have stuff growing throughout the year, that's when things really start to, set into place, and you'll start to see the impact of having those plants around. And, again, as plants grow, you're going to chop up a lot of that and use that as mulch. So I'm a big fan of what they call chop and drop, which is really, as I'm processing things in my garden, I'm just finding places to leave it in the surface. A lot of times I'm looking for bare soil and covering that bare soil with it, which is, a really great way to just, again, take advantage of what you're growing and the fact that as things grow, they use nutrients, and then those nutrients are stored within the plant, within the cells of the plant. And so by leaving them on your surface, you're really incorporating some of that aspect of mulch into your environment. And then subsequently, as it decomposes, you're getting that life happening. Nutrients go back into the soil. Other creatures come in and live within that, whether it's a fungus or bacteria or bugs, right? So so I'm a big fan of more biology and more of a natural approach to these things. Work smarter, not harder. Because that's something where I can cover more area if I approach it in this manner versus the amount of time it takes me to use a tiller. Cost and energy and resources is just different. So so again, that's all based on your own kind of location and space. And then number 4 here is diversify crop rotations as much as possible, including cover crops, right? So, where you don't want to follow more nightshades with nightshades. So if you did potatoes one year there, don't do tomatoes the next year there, right? Kind of mixing it up. A lot of that has to do with, obviously, disease management, but also, as I'll get into, is they found that some cover crops, when planted in orchard row spaces, the area where typically large commercial orchards where they're driving the truck down, those areas, when they plant these certain mustards and blends of cover crops, actually reduces the amount of soil nematodes that are present. So they tested before and they tested after. So those kind of things are really, there's a lot of those chemical aspects that are happening. So that's a lot of why the recommendations for diversity of crops is there. So yeah, again, kind of apply that to your own space and kind of what you have going on. Okay, so soil nitrogen cycle. I put this in here because I want to make sure that folks are familiar with this, because this is a key part of why cover crops are so important. So we have atmospheric nitrogen over here on the left and legume crops right in the middle, right? And this is a lot of our key features that I'm going to key in on with cover crops, because leguminous crops have the ability to fixate nitrogen gas out of the atmosphere and store it in root nodules within the plant. And they, of course, use some of those nitrogens to be able to grow their leaves. So the ability for this plant to pull atmospheric nitrogen out instead of drawing it from the soil is a key piece of their ability and feature, right? So you can imagine growing a crop after and being able to utilize this nitrogen that's pulled out of the air and being able to till that into the soil or chop it and surface have it laid on the surface will facilitate some of this this nitrogen passing into the soil. So again, there's different practices around it. Typically, we're crimping it and just rolling over it. There's like a, not quite a mow, but basically if you imagine a giant like tube that just is rolled across these fields and it flattens out these crops. So typically that's with the legumes what the practice is. And then you can see the nitrogen moves into this crop harvest or we're gathering it for livestock, right? And so then it goes back down into the soil organic microbes. You have decomposition and microbial support that happens where they're changing the nitrogen from insoluble nitrogen into soluble nitrogen, or they're changing it from inaccessible nitrogen into accessible nitrogen for the plants to be able to absorb again. So that's where you see the soluble nitrogen becomes then available. You lose some, of course, because nitrogen is water soluble. You lose a little bit of this to your groundwater and surface water. So being really mindful of our fertilizer applications is really critical, which is where I really am a big proponent, again, of cover crops, because the decomposition time slows down the loss of the nitrogen. It allows the natural breakdown to occur over time. So it's kind of a time release fertilizer in a sense. So I really like that aspect. And again, some of this nitrogen is insoluble until the organic or the microbial activity occurs and makes it soluble. So that's, again, that's one of those aspects to kind of think about. Versus, we have over here on the left, nitrogen fertilizer from a factory, right? And that farmer incorporates those fertilizers into their soil, which, again, that's where goes directly as soluble nitrogen typically. And, as soon as you start watering or as soon as the rain comes, you're losing a lot of that nitrogen to your groundwater and your surface water areas. So I think that's kind of general information here. This, is really, you can dive into a lot of these details. And there's a lot of information about these various aspects and the rate of decomposition, those kind of things. But we'll, I'll let you guys kind of browse and look around that at another time. So function. So I mentioned that cover crops, have these various functions, and these are the three main areas. You have soil health management, erosion management, and integrated pest management. So soil health management, that's kind of the key one, right? This is green manure and biomass, which is mainly what I've been mentioning, is when we use these to nitrogen out of the air, and then we're going to use them as our green manure or our fertilizer. That's a key function for soil health and management. The second is scavenging nutrients. So we'll talk about some of these different grass crops. There are different oatmeals and rye and these kind of grasses will actually scavenge nutrients, meaning that planting them after a season of growth of cash crop growth any nutrients that are remaining in the soil can be scavenged from these grasses. And then those grasses, if we cut them down before they start to flower, will help restore again some of that green manure and that nutrients back into the soil for that slow decomposition to unfold. So then the second aspect, erosion management, and that kind of speaks for itself, where we're planting various plants to be able to hold the soil in place. So on hillsides, I know we have a lot of hillsides in San Diego. I'm not sure. I'm guessing that there are a lot of various canyons and these types of spaces throughout Riverside. And so, managing that soil from eroding and going into our storm drain systems and into our river systems is really important. So, there's a lot of different plants that can be utilized in that manner. Really, it's that one's where I always recommend perennial plants because a lot of times those hills, we don't want to keep reseeding them. But once we establish a bunch of perennial plants, then we can hold those in place, and then we can start, incorporating some of these other cover crops and various plants again into that system. And then integrated pest management. This is really one of the most important concepts in our current ag management and organic agriculture and regenerative agriculture philosophies. This is a key piece. Is basically, because both, in organic agriculture, we're not using a lot of pesticides. The ones that we are using OMRI listed, it's really about timing. So, being able to increase our biodiversity and attract our beneficial macro and microbiota, these are key pieces that, again, it's work smarter, not harder. So if we can plant, plants like, rosemary and thyme and oregano and lavender, these ones that have really, really small flowers, they're going to attract all those beneficial macro insects, right? So, the cyprid flies and various assassin bugs, these things are really commonplace in my garden now. They just show up, right? I don't have to do anything other than having food for them. And so that attraction to those flowers and that biodiversity is a key piece of that. And then as far as the other aspect of integrated pest management is weed suppression. So I definitely can attest for how, hairy vetch spreads all over, and it definitely grows up and across a bunch of different plants. Particularly, I noticed mine really like to grow up the mallow. Mallow is definitely, a taller plant, and so having something to grow up allows vetch and the field peas to kind of cling on to. Yeah, African blue basil is great. Those are awesome. Yeah, and the vetch in the orchard is great if you can keep it and have it spread around. I definitely am a proponent of it. And also, I really love clovers. And we'll kind of get to some of those other clover options. But yeah, definitely blue basils, oreganos, all those plants in the in that sage family. All of those things are definitely really great. They have a lot of small flowers. I also do a lot of fava beans over the winter, especially because those are also leguminous and they produce a food. And then they're in the pea family, so all of the leaves are edible, so you can eat the tops, saute them up. They're really great to add, but they also create a lot of biomass. So I really love them as a green manure. Same with vetch. Vetch is definitely one of the best. They're one of the best biomass producers, one of the highest nitrogenous producers as far as cover crops go. Vetiver, I haven't grown vetiver. I can't remember if I have that in my list on here. In a few slides, we'll see if that one comes up. But yeah, we can kind of try and find an answer for you there, Fang. Let's see. So soil health management, right? So this is the first one, and like I said, this is kind of the key piece of cover crops. So leguminous cover crops fixate nitrogen from the atmosphere and store it within their structure, right? And then cover crops can produce large amounts of plant residue that can add organic matter to the soil. And green manure is the cultivation of plants for the use of organic plant material as a mechanism for fertilizer and soil nutrition, right? So using cover crops as green manure will provide nutrients for the following season. of providing approximately 30% of their profile if left on the surface as chop and drop mulch, or upwards of 80% if tilled under in the top 6 inches of the soil. So, you know, Brittany, when you mentioned kind of tilling, this is kind of one of those things where, again, it kind of depends on your situation. If you're growing cover crops in an area where you're going to do cash crops later, then tilling it in could be a good thing, because you're going to incorporate a lot of those nutrients right into the surface. Now, you know, the alternative of leaving it on the just chop and drop style, or mowing or crimping, is also, you know, is definitely an approach where, you know, you can still get the incorporation. But yeah, definitely, you know, the decomposition and loss, you know, because of it being on the surface is notable. So again, that's why I say it kind of depends on your situation. Typically for me, I have so much biomass, and in the orchard especially, I'm not really needing a ton of nitrogen. So, you know, mainly if I'm going to do, you know, like a corn or something like that, or tomatoes that require a lot of nitrogen, then I'll chop it up fine and kind of do, again, give a pass through about with the I'm blanking on this thing, with the broad fork. And the broad fork is a great way to kind of incorporate a bit of it, and pull and drop. Yeah, so that's basically a similar approach. The reason that I might not recommend that, that I would prefer tilling it in, is because if you're gonna pull it out and you're gonna expose the roots and you're gonna disturb that surface, you might as well just go all the way and turn the top 6 inches under. Versus like if you were to crimp it, which is again like just, you know, you could put a board down, lay a board down and just walk on it and kind of, you know, slide that up and, you know, roll it over. That side of it is where, you know, you're going to get that surface 30% of that profile. But if you're pulling those out, you're within that root structure, there's a lot of microbial and fungal activity that occurs. You know, the mycorrhiza specifically relate to those roots. And if you just crimp it, then the mycorrhizal activity still occurs because those roots are still there. And then you're subsequently replanting it. And so you're still getting that replacement of the roots, so the mycorrhizal activity can continue. But yeah, it's again, it's kind of a dependent on your situation. Yeah, exactly. So keeping the roots in the soil, exactly. So that way they can stay there and they can break down naturally. Yeah, and exactly. Just if you can, just basically cut it. You know, you can leave, you know, a few inches. What also is nice is if you have a field planted in this way, if you cut it, then there's a lot of leftover kind of like structure. And that structure, you know, if you think about it, there's a little shade on one side of that structure. And, you know, the moisture and the dew will condense on that structure and will drop. So, you know, it'll also hide your sprouts. So there's all these aspects where, you know, it's great that we're talking about all these components, because it really, again, it depends on your situation as how you're going to apply it. But overall, if you think about it in these more comprehensive manners, then you start to see those aspects of where you can gain a little extra moisture and a little protection for your next crops in this way. So yeah, just kind of, again, all these thoughts are really great. You guys have a really great group of folks that seem very, you know, like this isn't the first time y'all have heard this, which is great. So then also some non-leguminous cover crops do have a high nitrogen scavenger capacity. So that's kind of what I mentioned about some of these cereal grains and these other grasses. So erosion management, less bare soil means less erosion, right? So you're reducing your runoff from irrigation or rain, because it's not just washing, right? It's slowing down. So this is physics, right? This is all comes down to physics. Less bare soil, that's like kind of what we just mentioned when you chop it, you know, being able to kind of have that leftover mass to be able to slow down the water. Yeah, right. Yeah, the biomass. Yeah, for greens, you can always eat that. The chickens can always eat that. Yeah, and then like I said, I use it in areas where it's bare, and I just cover my soil with it. Yeah, and similar with these grass cover crops, right? Typically, they have extensive root systems. They can support the reduction of erosion. You know, some grasses like alfalfa is 12 to 18 inches that those roots can get down into. So that's definitely a great structural support for the soil. So especially in areas where we also are trying to get some permeation into that soil, having these grasses that are deeply rooted is really helpful for, again, opening that pore space. So, you know, this could be a good time where you scatter your gypsum and then you're seeding with your grass cover crops after that and trying to get that permeation to happen. And then this concept, organic conservation tillage, these systems are basically no-till systems where, like I mentioned, they flatten the crops onto the soil surface to reduce the soil erosion. And then to also, it helps retain this ideal moisture and temperature. And then ultimately it improves the soil quality. It enhances weed suppression, right? Because when those crops are laid flat, it's harder for weeds to break through. And then ultimately you can improve crop performance this way. You know, what I end up doing is when that happens, I lay it flat. And then when I go and I plant out my starts, I just kind of clear out that little area and plug my start in the ground. And, you know, it already has a jump start, right? Oh yeah, the tunneling bees. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it definitely. I mean, there's always a little bit of bare soil in there, right? That's kind of, it just kind of depends on our situation. Are we like trying to eliminate, you know, plant weeds that we don't really want? You know, but yeah, there's 83 native bee species in California. I'm a big proponent of hedgerows for this reason because there was a research article that I read where 81 of those 83 bee species increased in their populations because of having hedgerows, perennial hedgerows, and ultimately, it's really comes down to what they call seasonal nectaries, or, you know, flowers throughout the year. So as long as you're, again, this comes into that biodiversity aspect. Plant flowers throughout the year that you know, all the bugs can eat. So as long as there's something flowering in the garden this season, this month, you're doing good. And I try to always think, if I can have flowers all year round, makes the missus happy, and it makes the plants happy, and, you know, everybody's happy about that. So big proponent of that. So, and then in this organic conservation tillage, no-till cycles, basically this is kind of what it looks like. Is they do the winter wheat, their cover crop, and they use lentils, turnips, radish, canola, oats, and then it's followed by corn in the spring, summer, and then soybeans or sunflowers, and then spring wheat. So this is kind of like that cycle of, you know, get the winter wheat harvested, plant your cover crops, so that way in the spring you can smash those down and have your corn and soybeans or sunflowers come out during your summer, spring, summer, and then you can cycle that with your spring wheat. So, you know, these kind of options are really a good approach. But yeah, that winter cover crop is really the big one. The mix of lentil, the legume, turnips and radishes for opening pore space again, because they penetrate deeply. Canola and oats are for scavenging. So those are kind of, that's that cycle of over the winter planting that mixed cover crop. Okay, so and then the integrated pest management. So basically, with the cover crops, you know, we're attracting beneficial insects. They're grown as row buffers to encourage pests to be able to leave cash crops alone. Utilized for weed suppression. So some crops grow really quickly and then can outcompete the weeds for sun, water, and nutrients, right? And then killing of soil-borne pests. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. Crop rotations, and the changes in soil biology, including competitive increased predation and interference of crop pathogen signals, allelopathic chemicals, which is that biofumigation that I mentioned with the brassica green manures. So these are a mustard green that releases these allelopathic chemicals that ultimately act as a biofumigant for nematodes, which is amazing. Amazing article I read about that as a key method for reducing soil nematodes within orchard crops. Crowd out Bermuda grass. Oh man, that's a tough one. Yeah, I try to remove as much of that Bermuda grass as possible, and then just outcompete it with whatever other thing you can, whether it's other grasses or you know, clovers, or, you know, any of these cover crops that we'll go over in these next few slides. Basically, yeah, try and get as much of those out I use this like kind of undercut tool. It's made by Ames, AMES, right? Um, I'll try and look it up. It's basically it's kind of it has like an arc shape, and then it has this bar. It's kind of a long, like a long wide bar, and it has kind of sharp edges on both sides. And I use it like chop at everything, and it kind of wedges out. And I try and undercut all the grasses and other weeds that way. And then I seed. So I just did that today at a client's house where I undercut a lot of those invasive weeds that he has, and then I scattered a mixture of cover crops out there. 4 different types of clovers. So yeah, you just got to outcompete it, and you just got to be diligent. And then once you start to get that transition away from the other weeds that you're not wanting, then you can target remove those ones that still exist. But yeah, it's definitely that's a 3-year process to try and outcompete that stuff. Yeah, and then increasing the plant biodiversity will support the growth of microorganisms and beneficial insect populations. All the microorganisms secrete compounds that bind the soil together into aggregates, which ultimately improves our water infiltration and our aeration and our resistance to wind erosion. So so this is a key piece of why leaving those roots in the soil for the presence of those microorganisms is really, really critical. Oh yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, the nematologist and planting the brassicas to crowd out the nematodes. Yep. Yeah, I'll have to look up this article again and see if I can send it over. I want to say I have some at the end of my presentation. I have some. It might be it's not a hula ho. It's similar in the concept, but I'll try and send you guys a link on that too. But at the end of my article, or at the end of my presentation, I have a bunch of different links, and I'll show you where I get a lot of this information for this presentation, so you guys can go check out some of this other stuff for future reading. Okay, so types of cover crops. I'm going to kind of go quickly through these, just because I know we're kind of getting close to the end of the time, and I want to leave some more room for questions. But basically, these are the groups of cover crops: forage legumes, green manure, biennial and perennial legumes, grasses, cover crop mixes, and then orchard cover crops. So I'm going to kind of go over these different aspects. And again, what I can do is I can send you guys my presentation, so that way you guys can review it. And then I know, again, Kirk mentioned that we're recording this, so you guys should be able to review it in that way as well. So forage legumes. So these are the most common forage legumes that I've come across: alfalfa, red clover, white clover, trefoil, alseek and bursting clover, rose clover, any of these clovers, common vetch, crown vetch. And basically, these are all amazing for fixing nitrogen, right? So I definitely have read about the inoculation of legumes with nitrogen-fixing bacteria to support their function and success. We have a lot of that present in our native soil. So, because we're perennial cultivators, this is here. So I haven't found the need to inoculate them with any type of special mycorrhizal or fungus. Typically, I am using a mycorrhizal blend. Just like with your yogurt, you have a swath of different types of bacteria that will help you with that, the fixing of that. And so similar in our soil, where you have these different sets of bacteria and fungus. So typically with my trees, when I'm planting them into my orchard, since I'm pulling them out of a container, I'm putting that on those roots. So that's typically when I'm using my mycorrhiza and rhizobial bacterias. And they come in powdered forms at your local nurseries. One that I really like is called Great White, Great White Myco. I'll type it here. If I can type right. Yeah, so this company makes a swath of different ones, some that are single fungus, some that are up to like 40 different ones. So just kind of based on your budget and your need, highly recommended. And then, some of these fungi and bacteria are strain specific for different plants. So in that aspect, that's why they've created these, multi-packaged ones that, that way you don't have to, sift through and pick and choose, is this one going to work for this plant or that plant? But again, I typically am only using this for when I'm planting my trees out. And so, when I'm transplanting those trees, I'll spread a little bit in the hole with my other supplements, the gypsum and the fertilizer. And then I'll add that fungus and bacteria onto the roots directly, because they have to contact the roots in order to work. And then I'll plant those guys in there. And square holes, I know that was one of the secrets that I wish I would have known way back in the day. Was don't dig round holes, dig square holes, twice as big as your pot. Oh yeah, Extreme Garden, the Azos by that. Yep, I've definitely used that as well. Those are great. I've also seen they have a product that is it's in a pouch, and you just bust this thing open and you put it right underneath your plant as you're transplanting it into your hole. Those are great. Yeah, I definitely have utilized their products before. Definitely recommend them as well. So for green manures, really hairy vetch is my favorite. It's a huge producer. Crimson clover, white mustard, yellow lupine, sun hemp is another big one I've heard a lot of success around. Jack bean, common vench, crotalaria, phacelia, more clovers, black oats, purple bush beans, Persian clovers, blue lupines, even soybeans. As long as you process them down before they go to production, they're great for green manure. Sibania rostrata and Sesbania bispinosa. I don't have as much experience with these ones, but those ones also came up in my list of research. I love this information about the hairy vetch and crimson clover, though. Over 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre for the next crop, right? So this is a massive amount of nitrogen. And really, we have no excuse to not grow these if we're needing that nitrogen fixation, especially because, like I said, the mechanism by which the breakdown unfolds, we're reducing the amount of nitrogen that's going into our waterways, which for me is like, it's a critical reason why I've chosen regenerative agriculture over traditional or over modern agriculture. And then field peas, big flower vetch, and red clover, also a large amount of nitrogen, 30 to 80 pounds per acre. Oh, cool. Yeah, woolly vetch. Yeah, that's great to hear. Yeah, I think any of the vetch are amazing. So, really, like, if you can incorporate a blend of those. I have a picture of mine flowering right now. It's a really beautiful purple. So yeah, I definitely love vetch. A huge proponent. Here's a list of the biennial and perennial legumes that you can plant. Alfalfa, crown vetch, red clover, sweet clover, and white clover. I give a little information about when you want to plant those. Alfalfa early spring to late summer. This is a really key slide for the specificities around why you would pick one versus another. Definitely take a look at this one, snap at it, whatever you got to do. Like I said, use this as a reference because, I pulled from a variety of sources to find this info. And, so like here, alfalfa is a poor choice for soil condition repair and problem situations, right? So, you need certain soil conditions for each of these. The clover, typically I'm getting them from the local nurseries. Some of our nurseries carry a variety of cover crops they buy in bulk. I went to, we have an organization called Site One Landscape Supply. They're a John Deere production. I just went today and they had a mixed bag of, for 1 pound of mixed clover. It was 2 different types of white clover, a red clover, and a berseem clover. It was $7 for 1 pound. And I want to say 1 pound is good for like 2,000 square feet. So it's pretty affordable if you can find it. But yeah, Site One Landscape. Yeah, go check with them. Yeah, and it's definitely, I really have found a lot of my irrigation supplies come from them. But yeah, I was really happy to see they had wildflower blends in there, both for shade as well as perennial wildflower blend. I'm all about perennials if I can find them. So, well, in the orchard, any of those is great. It's just what happens is sometimes if it gets too tall for the orchard, you can run into challenges. But yeah, I found that almost all clovers are great within the orchard because they usually stay under 18 inches. And the big thing I try to think about is creating a 12 to 18-inch circle around the base of the trunk. So that way, again, it's not growing right up into the trunk. You're not having excess water right around the trunk. But outside of that 12 to 18 inches, awesome to have any clover in the orchard. So yeah, you can, and if you did the red clover, just go through a seed with the white clover too. Again, all these are they're all perennials. So if you can get them to flower and keep seeding, that's what you're looking for. Okay, and then the grasses. So these are used to scavenge nutrients from the previous crops, particularly nitrogen, right? The extensive root systems help with that. They're great for weed suppression. Like we said, you can kind of flatten them. Now, this is the key with the grasses. If you grow them to maturity, the amount of available nitrogen becomes lower because they have a high carbon to nitrogen ratio when they finish. So basically, when they start growing their flowers and their seeds, it changes this the availability of the nitrogen. So if you're growing them as a to pull nitrogen out and capture and to reuse, make sure you're just flushing those down before they go to flower. So basically, yeah, you can kill them or cut them back early, and you get that better nitrogen ratio. So now there's a couple different types. There's annual cereals and perennial forage grasses. So the annual cereals, we have winter rye, oats, barley, buckwheat, millet, and spring wheat. I've grown buckwheat in the summer. Awesome for beneficials, really easy to grow. Yeah, weed suppression and green manure. I've also grown barley. That one also, does really well. And again, these do like to have, some of them do like to have a bit of nitrogen in them. So that's where, if you are following an active cash crop with these, it's really awesome and it's a great approach. Or if you just have an area like with the buckwheat, a section where you're just, you don't want it to go fallow, but you're going to not plant a cash crop there for the season, buckwheat's a great option. Yeah, so again, all very detailed information here about why you would pick one. I want to key in on the winter rye. Has this decomposing residue that has an allelopathic effect. So that's, again, those chemical benefits for our soil. And this one particularly suppresses germination of weed seeds. So if you, that Bermuda grass, that was mentioned earlier, this winter rye or the cereal or grain rye might be a good option for trying to, use some of those chemical approaches for suppressing some of the other weed seeds that exist. And yeah, again, roll and crimp on these ones, great approach. Oops. Let's see. And then, yeah, some of these like the millet are frost sensitive, so just be mindful of those kind of things. But yeah, again, another good, for reflecting upon later. So and then perennial forage grasses. These are, so you have, I don't know why I mentioned annual ryegrass in here under perennial, so the Sudan grass and the sorghum Sudan hybrids, these are the ones I really want to key in on. These ones, I've grown a bunch of various sorghums, and they do really well. They get, get pretty large and can take up some space. But, again, a good biomass, good for pulling out various chemicals or nutrients in the soil. And then also they have that same allelopathic properties, so when you process down those leaves, they can break them down. So basically, if there's, I'm trying to think what they call those tools. I mean, if you look up a crimper tool, so basically imagine like, so here's like a good little example, right? Imagine this at a large scale, right? And basically you're just rolling this over all the plants, so instead of mowing them and cutting, it's literally just, you imagine your plants, and as this rolls, it's just folding it right over. So, if you have a large area and you can get something like this that had, a bar attached to it, you can push that guy. So that's an option. The other option is like in a small area, you can use like a board, take a board and just, stand it on its side and then push it over and let it flat things. go to the next space, push it over. So yeah, kind of general concept of weed whacking them down. But yeah, the crimping, it's rolling and crimping on a large scale. You can imagine they basically are driving the tractor with this tube behind it, rolls everything over. So yeah, so a lot of this information and the language behind it is for commercial production. But of course, we're backyard fruit growers, so we got to find a way to apply it and get in. Ingenuity, is going to be your friend in these kind of situations. Because I'm sure we got a board lying around that we can just start pressing around. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't pull them. Yeah, just lay it flat. The only things I pull typically are things that I'm trying to eliminate, and I'm trying to pull it before it goes to seed. That's like the big challenge is try to get out there and have that time to drip before it gets to seed. But sometimes kind of one of those things to reflect on. Mallow is a native. Nettles, those are super high in nutrients. So if you're not eating them or making them for food, both of those are edibles that are great medicinals. But they're also great for our soil. I kind of find that a very fascinating thing, that what's good for us, to consume is also good for our soil to consume. And so, I'm against those, and I don't only consider weeds. I consider them part of my biodiversity. And so in that sense, I try to make sure the net take over my garden, but, so of course I end up pulling out of my rows. But flattening those down and turning them into the soil is great to use them. And then a lot of these are forage. Like, someone, I think Sarah mentioned there, was, this type of stuff is for forage. And then cover crop mixes are sold very commonly. Like I mentioned, that clover mix. A lot of times you'll see these mixtures of grasses and legumes, which is great for cover crops. Here's an example of one, Renee's Garden. This is, they call this their scattered garden seeds cover crop. So this one is a mix of winter rye, hairy vetch, daikon radish, rapeseed, which is canola oil, turnip, and Austrian winter peas. I did this out in the my very open areas that I'm trying to establish, because this one is definitely great at suppressing weeds and really just taking over areas. This is another cover crop blend that I got from, this one's Botanical Interests. So this one is a soil builder peas mix. So this one is, let's see, let's say here. So this is it's just field peas and oats. So this one I also did out in the field, just again to capture some of that nitrogen and to to boost some of the legume crops that I have going out there. So these are this is kind of expensive, $3 for 65 grams, and suppose this only covers 80 square feet. So this is a small space area. This Renee's Garden, this one is 3 ounces, 500 square feet. I think this one's $14. So again, if you can go to Site One, that's a better option as far as, especially with the clover. So the clover, this one, I got this 1 pound of clover from what's the nursery? Walter Anderson's Nurseries, which is one of our local nurseries. This one, $13 for 1 pound. So for half the price at Site One, I got a mix of 4 different clovers instead of just the one white clover. So those are, again, a couple options out there. It's expensive though if you buy those little pouches, and even this can, I mean, it was great. So for your like little backyard garden, great. Large spaces, not quite what I want to pay for it. So that's the peas oats mix I mentioned. Scatter Winter is another one that I saw with Johnny's Seeds sells that one. Winter rye, hairy vetch, daikon radish, canola. Nope, that was the Scatter Winter that I just showed you. That's Renee's Garden. I know Johnny Seeds also carries a various set of cover crops, both individually as well as some mixes. But yeah, like this OCT system is mentioning rye, vetch, fodder radish. That's really important. And then readily killed by rolling, which then leaves that mulch. So instead of having to chop everything, sometimes when you cut things, they don't always die, right? They come back. So that's something to consider, that certain ones, when you roll them, then they die anyways. So just another reflection. Um, Yeah, that's great. Yeah, favas. I end up with tons of those. I give away a lot of fava seeds because of that. And then this is the last section of the orchard cover crops. Alfalfa as a dry row cover. So that's the area where they're driving the truck through. There shows contribution to the tree nitrogen available. And again, we're not looking for a ton of nitrogen in our trees. So, but yeah, having the alfalfa as a perennial within those drive rows is amazing. And, again, it reduces the dust that gets kicked up, all these kind of things. White clover is, again, one of my favorites underneath the tree as a living mulch. Its co-location with the tree roots enables the nitrogen within those root nodules to be physically in there with the tree roots, which is really awesome to just have it right there. And then when you're going through and kind of just chopping stuff back, you're having that surface mulch that will break down and give you that extra fertilizer. And then having it as a living mulch in the tree rows shows these quality benefits and meaningful nitrogen contribution. And, I did see some concern over competition with the trees. Basically, they're talking about potential elevated vole, different gophers not being, it's harder to see the hole if you have other things growing there. So, it can be harder to on a large scale manage your gopher populations when it's not so easy to see the hole, in a bare empty field. But for me, like I said, you guys know kind of where I sit on this stuff. I would rather have that kind of activity happening and just be addressing it as it comes up than to be concerned about we might have more life happening in our garden. What a challenging thing, right? And then the perennial grasses as cover in dry valleys, like I mentioned, reduces the dust, provides a stable surface for the machinery, because that's the big challenge in these large scale ag productions is when you're driving the tractor over it or the cars over it over and over and over, you're compacting your soil and it becomes a really big challenge. So having stuff there to keep that pore space open, like we mentioned earlier, is really critical. So here's some pictures of some of the field peas, the vetch on the left and the field peas on the right. And you can kind of see in that right picture a little grafted tree kind of behind there. That's some of my stone fruits going there. But yeah, this is it's thick. It's thick out there. But yeah, so I kind of wanted to show like when to plant some of these because they definitely break them down into warm season and cool season crops. So here's your list of warm season crops. Again, I'm not going to go over all these details, but your warm season consists of berseem clover, cowpeas, soybeans, velvet bean, which is mucuna, mustards, radishes, sunflowers, and turnips. So all of these are, again, if you have an area where you need to plant a little bit extra, these are all great options. And again, it kind of this slide will go over all the various details of when, like some of these obviously not frost tolerant, right? So you can't plant it before your last frost. And then just kind of why you utilize them. So again, a good reference slide. Okay, and then cool season. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, your cover crops will definitely camouflage a lot of the other cash crops that you're trying to plant. So I definitely like to get that cycle going because of that. And that's why, like I said, like crimping them or cutting them is definitely a better approach than pulling them out because then you can just stick stuff and kind of hide it amongst there. And then for your cool season, the options you have are crimson clover, field peas, the Austrian winter peas, Canadian field peas, hairy vetch, subterranean clover, and fava beans. And again, all of these are able to tolerate some cold. So I definitely recommend these guys. And again, it kind of talks about season of planting, like the favas. When you plant them September, November as a cover crop, then you'll get that set over the winter. If you're using them as a vegetable, February, March is kind of when those start to rack up and set. And it takes that 4 to 5 months to mature. But yeah, even if you're eating the fava beans or using it as fodder, great use. Even if you're harvesting from them and having that production, it's still really great. Something to mention though, that they tolerate frost, but once it starts to get above 80, then they start to drop and decline. And then there's a rare disorder called favism that certain individuals, typically of Southern European origin, they have an enzyme deficiency that causes symptoms from fava beans and their pollen as well. So just something to consider if you have some of that Southern European origin, and you haven't been around favas or eaten them or tried them. Something to consider and look into. Just do a little research. Yeah, the gophers. I really like the black hole traps, or the kind of circular tube ones, and I like that they have the latch that pops up. Yeah, I really like those a lot. I always plant them in opposite directions, so whenever I find a hole, I open it up, put them both directions. Try to wear gloves, so that way I don't leave any oil residue on them. Those guys are smart, man. They're tough. Okay, so here's where you guys can find more info. Most of my information came from the USDA Sustainable Ag and Research and Education site. This is a specific link for their cover crops. Amazing. And then this particular article, Managing Cover Crops Profitably, talks a lot about the costs incurred with implementing cover cropping. So I highly recommend you take a look at that article. But yeah, great resource. If you guys haven't visited this website, you guys got to go check that one out, because you guys will spend hours and hours and looking at stuff on there. I of course have to incorporate my alma mater, Oregon State. They have a bunch of articles on cover crops. Definitely where I really kickstarted my info and insight and research into cover cropping. So I gotta give a shout out to them. UC Davis also, I am a big supporter of Davis and their ag program. So I highly recommend you go check them out and, take a look again at their cover crops and what they're talking about around sustainable ag. Washington State University also has some great resources about cover crops. So definitely check theirs out too. And then, the Ag and Natural Resource, UC Ag and Natural Resource Program, part of the UC Cooperative Extensions Program. Great resource, lots of information there as well. And then, of course, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, part of the USDA, tons of information about these kind of concepts. So, if you go on there and you search cover crops, or if you're looking for a specific one, like FANG, that one that you mentioned earlier, throw that in as search on all these websites and see what comes up. And I'm sure you're going to find some good info about it. All right. And then the last thing I want to mention, because this is a really current situation, and I know talking with Christine that you guys have kind of gotten some information about carbon farming. So, I don't want to spend too much more time, because I know we're getting past that hour. I want to be able to just kind of touch base on this, because not sure how much you guys know about it, but I know that right now there's millions of dollars being put into this fund. So basically, carbon farming is an environmental management strategy supporting agriculture to draw down atmospheric carbon into the plant tissue and into those roots where we can store it in the ground. Compost and mulch at approximately $700 an acre is one of the key methods right now being utilized in orchards. Avoiding tilling, using cover crops, perennial trees, shrubs, and grasses, all of these are functions of carbon farming. And then the top 8 inches of U.S. croplands and grassland soils contains more than 18 billion tons of carbon. So these are massive amounts of carbon. So when we're looking at it, this is the carbon cycle. And so this is where, all of this concept comes from, right? Is that we're using this carbon dioxide in our plants, the decaying organisms, made of carbon are, putting down that organic matter into the soil, and then fossil fuels then extract a lot of those carbons out, and then we have all those emissions being released right into the atmosphere. And so subsequently then within the biosphere we have grasses and, pulling that out. They're, ready to be, they're being grazed. The animals are, consuming them. And then they're supporting that soil respiration. And then we're also, through our tilling, that CO2 is being released back into the atmosphere as well. So it's really key to kind of look at the ups and versus the downs, the up coming from tilling, the up coming from all these emissions, and then the downs coming from planting of grasses and, using animal agriculture appropriately, and then putting that back into the soil. And of course, the ocean is a key absorber of our atmospheric CO2. And that it really helps with the building of shells within the bivalves and the various snails and things that live in the benthic species that live in the sand. So so this is just, again, for your guys' reference, so you kind of understand why it exists. And it's important because U.S. carbon farming could lead to an annual carbon sequestration of 83 million tons per year on agricultural soils, just what we currently have in production. If we include the forest and all the U.S. land, as much as 475 million tons of carbon could be put into the ground each year. And just to give you guys a comparison of these numbers, in 2016, the California Air Resources Board estimated the state of California carbon emissions were 472 million tons. So, really, like, we need this to happen. It's not something that we just are hoping is going to happen. That's why we have this Healthy Soils program that got developed. So California decided we're going to, the Air Resource Board and the California Climate Investments Program started this California Cap and Trade program. So this launched in 2013 as an attempt to lower greenhouse gas emissions. It's the fourth largest program in the world. And what it does is the 450 largest businesses responsible for 85% of California's total greenhouse gas emissions are forced to pay into this program. In 2017, they paid $7.5 million, right? And so this is an active fund that's it's a pool, and it's just being dumped into. And it's these carbon farming programs, this healthy soils programs that the Department of Food and Agriculture is promoting, that is where we have funds available to us as farmers and agriculturalists. Typically, their smallest area they're rewarding is 1 acre. So if you have 1 acre or more, then you should be looking at this Healthy Soils program, which is, the link is right here for the CFA's website. You can get up to $100,000 to carbon farm. So we're talking hedgerows, cover crops, perennial permaculture and agriculture, meaning trees and native habitat restoration. All of these things fall into this. So if you guys fall into that, or if you guys are connected to other organizations, schools, or various public entities that don't know of this, or if you know other farmers that have large areas that are interested in organic and regenerative concepts, guide them this way, because right now we need all these funds to go towards people that understand how to apply these things, because a lot of it's right now is they're researching the 3 years ago. A lot more of these programs started, and so we're really getting the feedback now of what those drawdown numbers look like. And so we're starting to see more information come out every year. So just to give you an idea, 2017, $7.5 million, 2018, another 10 million from SB5 was put into it. And in addition to the 5 million from the California Climate Investments, and 18, we had $9 million awarded to 53 projects for 8,600 acres of demonstrations. So that's the ones that I'm talking about. In 2018, a lot of that funds, those 53 projects are starting to come into their 3-year, turn of into their, 2-3 year program. And so we're seeing a lot of information coming out. And this demonstration projects link will show you some of those things. And then in order to offset carbon emissions, we're going to need hundreds of thousands of acres, right? So that's where me as an agriculture or a forester and someone involved in natural resources and agriculture, this is really important to me. And so I'm always looking for opportunities to put more acres into production. So again, just like happy to share this information with anybody that can apply this because it's so important. So here's where you can find more information on some other programs that are successful. The Carbon Cycle Institute, great program. Marin Carbon Project, again, another great project, site that is a good example. And then the Environmental Defense Fund talks about how the cap and trade program works. This is something that's been in the works for a decade. To how do we do this? How do we like, hold these folks accountable that are emitting massive amounts of carbon, and they're just, they tried to do the carbon scrubbers and all these other things, but it really, bottom line is these folks are making money off of polluting our earth, and we need to do something about it. And so this is an attempt. It's not the ultimate solution, but it's definitely in the right direction. And, like I said, it's definitely a process. Yeah, more grants. And this is here's my information. I have a 501c3. Mongol Tribes organized as a 501c3. So the CDFA has definitely extended a bunch of their various grants. I'm always open to other projects. So if folks are interested in reaching out, if you guys have some ideas or things that where you see me and my organization fitting in, I'm developing an apprenticeship program, like I said, to support more beginning farmers and regenerative agriculture, perennial permaculture, agroecology, agroforestry. These kind of projects are very near and dear to my heart. So these are the kind of things where, of course, I'm looking to you rare fruit grower folks to help, select which plants to put in there, and help, just alongside with the Master Gardeners programs to service and support the volunteer needs, because, there's always a need. And, until the funds are there, until we can generate some of these things through the grants or through the Healthy Soils programs, we got to work together to kind of, figure this out together. Obviously, with the pandemic, we're seeing a lot of that happening, which I'm really, I'm grateful that it's moving us in that direction. Always a silver lining, right? So, so feel free to reach out. You can contact me here. Send me an email is probably the best way. I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I definitely update my Instagram more than the Facebook, but you can find me on both of those. My website is active as well. You can send folks there that are looking for more info about the things that I'm working on. But yeah, please keep in touch with me and follow along and reach out, say hi, and definitely appreciate the opportunity. And I'm open to more questions if folks are interested in chatting more. I'm here. I'm just relaxing, so be happy to share more.
Thanks so much, Nathan. So so guys, we're here at 8:33, so a few more minutes. So now, if you have any more questions and you haven't typed them in, you can unmute yourself. So you can unmute yourself and ask your question now if you like. So Nathan, I really appreciate you hanging around, allowing this opportunity for that. And what a lot of wonderful information in there. Learning a lot about the importance of cover cropping, helping with weed suppression, helping with carbon sequestration, green manure. Love all the terminology, taking the terminology and changing it in more positive, more positive effect for us. So really appreciate that. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay. Also, just want to give a quick chat. Just talk real briefly about member benefits about joining the California Rare Fruit Growers. There's chapters all over the state. We're here in the Inland Empire area, so Riverside, Corona. I'm in Upland. There's the if you want to come back to our chapters, we meet on the first Thursday of the month at 7 o'clock. For the foreseeable future, we'll be doing these online. We usually meet at the Harupa Mountains Discovery Center. That's over off the 60 where the metal dinosaurs are at. So you join our club, and also you can join the national body. You get their magazine every 2 months, which is an incredible magazine. I love reading those things cover to cover. So if you have any more questions, Lisa, take it away.
So other benefits once the Harupa Cultural Center opens back up again are we have several different orchards with citrus, peaches, apples, bananas, grapes. There's a lot of ways that you can help or receive information from tons of experienced members that we have. I mean, there is hundreds of years of experience in our chapter. And it's a lot easier to experiment on someone else's orchard than maybe your backyard, or even if you don't have a yard, come on out and work and develop the orchard at the Krupa Cultural Center once it's open again. I do have to make a correction. The Rare Fruit Grower Organization is $39 a year, and there's also a 3-year and a lifetime membership. Again, you can find more information at CRFG, or CaliforniaRareFruitGrowers.org. Thank you, Kirk.
Lisa, there is an electronic option if you don't want the hard copy magazine, and then it's only $29 a year. And
there you go,
you
even
get the
better.
magazine in an electronic form.
Thank you, Christine.
So the tool I mentioned earlier is the Ames double blade weed cutter. It's basically a wooden bar and then has this kind of attachment to it with a blade that's two-sided. So yeah, definitely if you guys want to look that one up.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Lisa, what's next? What are we doing?
If anyone is interested, last plug, if anyone is interested in joining, I can email you the application. And then Christine, do you want to go ahead and make any orchard updates?
Okay, yes. I have been very sad that we couldn't be in the orchard for about the last month. And I talked to Wes, and he said, we can come back in a small group for some work days. We have to pre-arrange. They'll open the gate, they'll send a staff member and open the gate and let us in. And then they will let us out again. So we're gonna be locked in while we work. So we have arranged this Saturday at 12:30 until 4:30 to have a work day. So if you've been missing being in our orchard, please come out. Let me know I have to know who's coming. So I know we already have Lisa Wright and Kirk wants to come, and then myself and my husband. So I think we have to kind of keep the groups under 10 so we can make sure we do our social, physical, whatever distancing, which is easy to do out in the orchard. But I mean, or do you think we need to wear masks, Lisa? You're muted.
Riverside County is recommending it, yes. Or
Okay.
bandana, scarf.
I have extra pirate bandanas. If people don't have a bandana, I can bring a supply of pirate bandanas. We used to sell them. So anyway, so I would recommend, if you want to come out, let me know that you're coming, and we need to meet, plan to be there by 12:20. So we're all there when they open the gate at 12:30. And then plan to stay till 4:30. If you have to leave earlier, I'm sure we can call somebody, their staff, and say we need to open the gate and let us out. But I have sweet potatoes I want to get into the ground as ground cover. You didn't mention that, Nathan. I've been researching sweet potatoes as ground cover. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, sweet potatoes, like the radishes, they can open things up. Yeah, I'm growing the Molokai sweet potato. It's a purple one.
That's what I
really
have,
like
exactly.
Yeah, those are great. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, I have those and some orange colored ones and some white ones too. But and the
their main function would be opening the soil spaces up, just like the radishes in that same sense. And of course radishes, just like those, they're broad, and so they can get, permeate pretty deep. So
yeah, they loosen up those. Yeah, so we're going to get sweet potatoes in the ground, and so I have some more of the seeds for the summer kind of stuff going on. But we also need to get more. It's supposed to rain Sunday night and Monday. It looked like Monday was going to be an inch of rain. So it'd be good if we can get more of the mulch spread. We still have some more cardboard, so we can do the cardboard and mulch. We're doing that with our pathways. It kind of goes against me, as you mentioned, Nathan. It was good to leave the wildflowers there, but the management there wanted us to not let the weeds get out of control. So we weed whacked. We have a lot of fiddlenecks growing there. Some of the brassicas and stuff. The mustard was growing there, so we weed whacked a lot of that. But yeah, next year we can try that, rolling them down instead. We did stamp a lot of them down in areas too. And
yeah, then, well, a lot of this type of stuff, it's like, my uncle at my orchard, he gave me kind of a hard lecture last month about all the weeds, and I'm like, Uncle, it's still winter. You got to give me a break. It's gonna happen. But I tried to, he comes to an older line of thought around, neat rows, clean rows, and trying to have a respectful conversation with him about why. Definitely was. How do you know the difference between what's a weed and what's not? So it's definitely a tricky conversation, but like I
Also, I
said,
have to train our volunteers who come out and think, okay,
Yeah.
this is what the hairy vetch looks like. Please don't pull this yet. And this is, I have calendula and nasturtiums growing out there. So trying to educate everybody so they know what things, we're trying to keep and not pull. And
exactly. That's definitely part of it. Yeah, it takes that education and that that practice of learning the differences, and and that's like where I think it's really important to have these kind of hands-on engagements where folks can really get into it and see it, and of course, like for those folks who are more on the administrative side, being able to show them the research from USDA and NRCS, some of these other government entities about it, definitely helps a lot too. Family's a whole nother game though.
Well,
Right.
Also, the fiddlenecks are a pollinator host plant. The painted ladies use them, and so I would dearly love to leave the fiddlenecks. So, or we left them in some areas, but and part of our grand design will be to have a pollinator garden corner. So
that sounds great. One thing that I've done in my community garden with the identification of good and bad things, I just made a poster. And there's a little garden shed that we put everything into. And when we're doing weeding or maintenance around the area instead of just your plots, we take this out, walk around, and do not pull this
That's
side,
a good
pull
idea.
this side. And so far, it's not 100% as we know, but it's better than running after each thing and having to almost
so far I've been
everything.
trying to take lots of pictures of the ones we've put and posting them on our Facebook page. This is what hairy vetch looks like, and
Yes, wonderful.
But a poster is a good idea.